The blizzard howled like a wounded animal, and through the snow a frozen brown horse staggered toward the farmhouse, its eyes pleading. When 12-year-old Lena opened the door, the horse did something unimaginable. It knocked, not with its hoof, but with its head, desperate, weak, as if begging for help. What happened next left her trembling. Lena had never seen a horse so broken. Ice clung to its matted coat, and its ribs jutted out like the bars of a cage. It collapsed on the porch, its breath shallow. Her father, a hardened farmer, warned, "That ain't just any horse, it's got ghosts in its eyes." But when the animal let out a shuddering whimper, Lena ignored him. She dragged old blankets from the barn, her fingers numb, and covered the trembling beast. The horse's gaze locked onto hers, grateful but terrified. Outside, the storm swallowed the world. Inside, something stranger than the weather was about to unfold. The horse refused to eat. Lena tried everything: fresh hay, sugar cubes, even the apples she'd been saving for her birthday. But it only stared at the farmhouse door with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. That night, she woke to the sound of hooves scraping against wood. The horse wasn't in the barn. It stood in the middle of the kitchen, its nostrils flaring as if it had caught the scent of something unseen. Her father, groggy with sleep, grabbed his rifle. "Ain't natural," he muttered. But then the horse did something that made Lena's blood run cold. It walked to the basement door and knocked again, this time with a frantic urgency. The basement had been locked for years. Her father never went down there, never spoke about it. And now this half-dead animal was acting like it knew something they didn't. Lena's fingers trembled as she reached for the rusted padlock. Her father's hand clamped down on her wrist. "Don't," he warned, his voice rough with something deeper than fear. But the horse let out a sound. Not a whinny, not a scream, but something in between, a noise that didn't belong to any creature she'd ever heard. It was enough to make her father step back. The lock clicked open, the door creaked, and then darkness. A damp, rotting smell slithered up the stairs. The horse didn't move. It just stared into the abyss, its ears pinned back like it was waiting for something to crawl out. Lena's flashlight flickered as she took the first step down. The beam caught something metallic, a chain, attached to nothing. No, not nothing. There were scratches on the floor, deep ones, claw marks. And then she saw the photo, torn, yellowed, buried under dust. A little girl, a brown horse, both smiling, both familiar. Her father's breathing turned ragged. "We need to leave," he said. But the horse blocked the stairs, its eyes wild. It wasn't letting them go, not until they saw the rest. The flashlight beam trembled in Lena's hand as she stepped further into the basement, the wooden stairs groaning under her weight, like they might give way at any moment. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and old, like dried blood. The horse remained at the top of the stairs, its massive body blocking the exit, its ears twitching at every sound. Lena's father clutched her shoulder, his fingers digging in painfully, but she barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the photograph in her hand. The girl in the picture couldn't have been older than 8, her hair in 2 messy braids, her grin missing a tooth. And the horse, its coat the same deep brown as the one now standing guard upstairs, its eyes just as knowing. But that was impossible. That horse would be long dead by now. Unless... A gust of wind howled through the cracks in the foundation, extinguishing the flashlight. For a heartbeat, there was only darkness and the sound of Lena's own panicked breathing. Then a new sound, a slow, rhythmic clink of metal against metal. Her father swore under his breath and struck a match, the sudden flare of light revealing what lay at the far end of the basement. An old iron cage, its bars twisted and bent, as if something had forced its way out from the inside. The chain she'd seen earlier led right to it. The links snapped clean through. Scattered around the cage were more photographs, all featuring the same girl and horse. But in each one, the girl looked progressively older, her smile fading, her eyes growing hollow. The last photo showed her as a teenager, her face streaked with tears, the horse nowhere in sight. Lena's throat tightened. "Dad," she whispered, "who is that?" Her father didn't answer. Instead, his gaze darted to the corner of the room, where a small, tattered journal lay half buried in the dirt. He lunged for it, but the horse, still upstairs, let out a piercing whinny that shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. And then, from the shadows beyond the cage, came a sound that stopped Lena's heart. A child's laughter. It was impossible. They were the only ones here. The laughter came again, closer this time, and with it, the faint smell of wildflowers, a scent that didn't belong in this rotting place. Lena's father dropped the journal like it had burned him. "We're leaving," he growled, dragging her toward the stairs. But the horse still wouldn't move. It stood rigid, its nostrils flaring, its eyes fixed on something behind them, something neither of them could see. Lena turned. The journal had fallen open to a single trembling page. In shaky handwriting, it read, "She's not gone. She's waiting. And the horse remembers." Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch, the wind screaming like a living thing. The basement door slammed shut above them. The slam of the basement door echoed through the cramped space like a gunshot, plunging them into near-total darkness, except for the flickering match in her father's shaking hand. Lena's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she whirled around, her back pressing against the damp stone wall. The child's laughter had stopped the moment the door closed, replaced by an eerie silence that felt heavier than the darkness itself. The horse upstairs let out another distressed whinny, followed by the sound of its hooves pawing frantically at the door. Not to get in, Lena realized with dawning horror, but to keep whatever was down here from getting out. Her father's match burned down to his fingers, and he cursed, dropping it. The brief flare of light as it hit the ground illuminated something that made Lena's blood freeze. Tiny footprints in the dust, leading from the cage to where they now stood. Fresh footprints. Her father fumbled for another match, his hands unsteady. "We need to get to the stairs," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The journal lay open at their feet, its pages rustling despite the stagnant air. Lena snatched it up, her fingers trembling as she turned to the next page. The writing was different here. Not the shaky script from before, but a child's careful, looping letters. "The horse is my friend," it read. "He promised to help me, but the bad man won't let me go." The next page was worse. A crude drawing of a man with a hatchet standing over a small figure lying in the dirt. The figure wasn't alone. A brown horse stood beside it, its head bowed. A cold draft brushed the back of Lena's neck. She jerked away, nearly dropping the journal. The smell of wildflowers was stronger now, cloying and sweet, undercut by something rotten. The horse upstairs was going wild, its hooves striking the door with enough force to splinter the wood. Her father grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the stairs, but the footprints in the dust had multiplied. They circled the cage, overlapped near the broken chain, and now, Lena's breath hitched, they led right to the base of the stairs. As if something had been standing there, watching them this whole time. Then, the whispering started. It wasn't words, not at first. Just a soft, rhythmic murmur, like a child singing to herself. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the darkness. Lena's father froze, his grip on her arm tightening painfully. The match in his other hand sparked to life, casting a frail glow over the basement. The whispering stopped. In its place came a single, clear word. Lena. Her name. The matchlight flickered, and for one heart-stopping second, Lena saw her, a girl in a tattered dress, her braids just like in the photograph, standing at the foot of the stairs. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth stretched into a smile that showed too many teeth. Then the light died, and the thing that wasn't a girl lunged. Upstairs, the horse screamed. The darkness swallowed them whole as the match went out, and Lena's scream caught in her throat like a physical thing. She felt the rush of air as something moved past her, too fast, too cold. And then her father was shouting, his voice raw with terror. The journal slipped from her fingers as she stumbled back, her shoulder slamming into the stone wall. The horse upstairs was in a frenzy now, its hooves striking the door with such force that the wood began to crack. Splinters rained down from the ceiling, mixing with the dust that choked the air. Lena's father grabbed her again, shoving her toward the stairs, but the thing in the dark was faster. A small, icy hand closed around Lena's wrist, its grip like iron. The smell of wildflowers turned sickly sweet, cloying, and beneath it, the unmistakable stench of decay. The flashlight, long forgotten in her pocket, suddenly flared to life, as if it had a will of its own. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the girl from the photographs. But she wasn't a girl anymore. Her skin was gray and stretched too tight over her bones, her eyes black pits that reflected no light. Her mouth was still fixed in that terrible smile, and when she spoke, her voice was a chorus of whispers, layered over each other like the wind through dead leaves. "You found me," she said, her head tilting to the side with a crack that made Lena's stomach lurch. "But you shouldn't have." Lena's father lunged, his shoulder slamming into the thing that wore the girl's face. It didn't budge. Instead, it laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and tightened its grip on Lena's wrist. Pain shot up her arm, white-hot and searing, and she screamed again, the sound lost in the chaos. The flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. For a split second, Lena saw the cage again, its bars twisted outward, as if something had escaped from within. Then the light settled on the journal, its pages fluttering open to reveal a new entry, one that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "The horse knows the way out. Follow him. He remembers the path." The thing holding Lena hissed, its head snapping, toward the journal. Its grip faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Lena wrenched her arm free and scrambled backward, her father pulling her up the stairs. Above them, the horse's frantic pounding had stopped. Instead, there was a new sound, the unmistakable scrape of a key turning in a lock. The basement door creaked open, revealing the horse's massive form silhouetted against the storm-lit kitchen. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and for the first time, Lena understood. The horse wasn't trying to keep them in. It was trying to keep her out. The thing in the basement shrieked, a sound that shook the walls and sent jars tumbling from the shelves. It lunged for the stairs, its movements jerky and unnatural. But the horse was faster. It reared, its hooves striking the ground with enough force to shake the house, and then it charged, not at Lena and her father, but past them, straight into the dark. There was a moment of silence, then a crash, then nothing. The flashlight, still lying on the basement floor, flickered once and went out. The silence that followed the horse's charge into the darkness was more terrifying than any scream. Lena clung to her father's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve, as they stood frozen on the stairs, straining to hear anything over the hammering of their own hearts. The storm outside had grown louder, wind howling through the cracks in the old farmhouse like a chorus of lost voices, but beneath it, beneath everything, was a new sound, a wet, rhythmic crunching, like teeth sinking into something soft. The flashlight remained dead on the basement floor, its absence of light somehow more oppressive than the dark itself. Then, without warning, the horse reappeared at the foot of the stairs. Its coat was streaked with something dark and glistening, its nostrils flaring as it exhaled sharply, its breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. It stared up at them, its eyes no longer fearful but resigned, as if it had done this before, as if it knew what came next. Lena's father moved first, pulling her up the remaining stairs with a strength born of pure adrenaline. The kitchen was in shambles, chairs overturned, the table splintered as if something heavy had been thrown against it. The back door hung open, snow swirling in to coat the floor in a thin white layer. The horse followed them, its hooves leaving dark prints on the wood. Not mud, Lena realized with a jolt. Blood. Fresh blood. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the horse nudged her sharply with its nose, steering her toward the door. Her father hesitated, his gaze darting between the horse and the basement entrance, where the darkness seemed to pulse like a living thing. "We can't," he said hoarsely. "Not in the storm." The horse snorted, stamping its foot impatiently. Then it did something that made Lena's breath catch. It bowed its head, its knees bending slightly, as if offering to carry them. The gesture was so human, so deliberate, that for a moment Lena forgot to be afraid. The journal's words echoed in her mind. The horse knows the way out. A thud from the basement shattered the moment. Something was climbing the stairs, slowly, deliberately. The horse's ears flattened against its skull, and without thinking, Lena grabbed her father's hand and hauled him toward the door. The cold hit them like a physical blow, the wind stealing the breath from their lungs as they stumbled into the snow. The horse was right behind them, its body a solid, warm presence at Lena's back. She risked a glance over her shoulder and wished she hadn't. The thing from the basement stood in the doorway, its two long fingers curled around the frame, its head cocked at that impossible angle. It wasn't smiling anymore. The horse nipped at Lena's coat, urging her forward. And then they were running, the snow swallowing their footsteps as the farmhouse disappeared behind them. The storm should have blinded them, should have made it impossible to navigate. But the horse never faltered. It led them through the whiteout, with uncanny certainty, its head low against the wind. Lena didn't dare ask where they were going. She didn't need to. The journal's final words played on a loop in her mind. He remembers the path. They crested a hill, and the horse stopped so abruptly that Lena nearly collided with it. Below them, half buried in snow, was another farmhouse. Abandoned, its windows dark, its roof sagging with the weight of years. The horse exhaled sharply, its breath a cloud in the freezing air, and Lena understood. This was where it had all begun. This was where they would end it. A low, guttural growl cut through the wind. The thing from the basement wasn't gone. It was following, and it was close. The abandoned farmhouse loomed before them like a rotting skeleton, its broken windows staring blindly into the storm. Snow had piled high against its sagging porch, swallowing the steps whole. The horse hesitated for only a moment before plunging forward, its powerful legs carving a path through the drifts. Lena and her father followed, their breath coming in ragged gasps, the cold seeping into their bones. Behind them, the growling grew louder, closer. But when Lena turned to look, there was nothing there. Just swirling snow and the creeping dread that something was watching from within the storm itself. The horse reached the porch first, its hooves clattering against the warped wood as it stopped before the front door. The door was ajar, the darkness beyond it absolute. The horse turned its head to look at Lena, its eyes reflecting the dim light in a way that made her stomach twist. It wasn't asking her to enter. It was waiting for her to decide. Her father grabbed her arm. "We can't go in there," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the wind. His face was pale, his eyes darting between the house and the storm behind them. "That thing, it's hurting us, like livestock." Lena shook her head, her fingers tightening around the journal she hadn't realized she was still clutching. The pages were damp with melted snow, but the words were still legible. "The bad man won't let me go," the child had written. "The horse is my friend." She looked back at the horse, at the way its ears twitched toward the empty fields, at the fresh blood matted in its coat. It had fought for them. It had bled for them. And now it was standing between them and whatever was coming. A howl tore through the storm. Not the wind, not an animal, but something in between. The horse's head snapped up, its nostrils flaring. Then, without warning, it reared, its front hooves striking the porch with enough force to shake the entire structure. The front door swung open with a groan, revealing a hallway choked with shadows. From deep inside the house came a sound that made Lena's blood run cold. A child's laughter. The same laughter from the basement. Her father's grip on her arm turned painful. "Lena, no!" But she was already moving, stepping past the horse and into the house. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood and something sweetly rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. The horse followed her, its body a solid presence at her back, its breath warm against her neck. The front door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, from somewhere above them, a floorboard creaked. The horse nudged her forward, its nose pressing insistently against her shoulder. The journal trembled in her hands as she took a step, then another, the floor groaning beneath her feet. The hallway opened into a parlor, its furniture covered in yellowed sheets, its walls papered with peeling floral print. A staircase rose to her left, its banister splintered and cracked. At the top of the stairs stood a shadow, small, hunched, watching. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The shadow tilted its head, mimicking the gesture from the basement. And then it spoke, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have come back." The horse let out a sound that was almost a sob and charged forward, its body crashing into the stairs with enough force to shake the house. The shadow shrieked, dissolving into the darkness as the horse's hooves struck the steps. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, a door slammed. Lena didn't realize she was running until she reached the top of the stairs. The horse was already there, its sides heaving, its ears pinned flat against its skull. The hallway stretched before them, doors lining either side, all of them closed except one. The last door on the left stood slightly ajar, a sliver of faint, flickering light spilling into the hall. The smell of wildflowers was overwhelming now. The horse stepped forward, its hooves silent on the worn carpet. It stopped before the open door and turned to look at Lena one last time. Its eyes were full of sorrow. Then it walked into the light. The moment the horse crossed the threshold into that flickering light, the entire house seemed to exhale, walls creaking, floorboards sighing, as if some long-held tension had finally been released. Lena stood frozen in the hallway, her father's ragged breathing the only thing anchoring her to reality. The light from the room pulsed gently, casting elongated shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. It wasn't electric light, it wasn't firelight, it was something else entirely, golden and shifting, like sunlight through leaves, but tinged with an eerie blue at the edges. The air smelled overwhelmingly of wildflowers now, so thick it coated Lena's tongue, making her want to gag. Yet beneath it, barely detectable, was the iron tang of blood. The horse had disappeared into the glow, but Lena could still hear it moving, hooves clicking against hardwood, then an odd, wet sound, like something heavy being dragged. Her father grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "We need to go," he whispered, his voice cracking with terror. "Now, while we still can." But Lena couldn't move, because the journal in her hands was vibrating faintly, its pages rustling on their own. And then, with a sound like a sigh, it fell open to a page she hadn't seen before. The handwriting here was different. Not the child's careful letters or the jagged script from earlier, but something elegant and flowing. The ink a strange, iridescent black that shimmered in the dim light. "The horse kept its promise," it read. "It brought you here, but the choice was always yours." Below the words was a sketch, crude but unmistakable. A horse lying on its side, a girl kneeling beside it, and behind them, a shadow with too many teeth. A floorboard creaked inside the glowing room. Lena's legs moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her forward until she stood in the doorway. What she saw inside made her breath stop. The room was empty, save for three things: the brown horse, standing motionless in the center, an old rusted hatchet lying at its feet, and a mirror, huge and ornate, its frame carved with twisting vines and flowers. The glass didn't reflect the room. Instead, it showed a sunlit field, the grass swaying in a breeze Lena couldn't feel. A girl sat in the grass, her back to the mirror. She was braiding wildflowers into a crown, and beside her, grazing contentedly, was a brown horse, young and strong, its coat gleaming in the sunlight. The real horse, her horse, let out a soft nicker and stepped toward the mirror. As it moved, Lena saw the wounds hidden beneath its matted fur, deep, ragged gashes that should have been fatal. Yet the horse walked steadily, its head high. When it reached the mirror, it turned to look at her one last time. Then it stepped through the glass, its body passing effortlessly into the sunlit world beyond. The moment it crossed, the girl in the mirror turned. She was smiling. And then the hatchet slid across the floor, stopping at Lena's feet. Behind her, her father screamed. The hatchet at Lena's feet gleamed dully in the strange light, its blade crusted with something dark and flaking that she knew wasn't rust. Her father's scream still echoed through the house, but it sounded distant now, muffled, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the sound. The mirror's surface rippled where the horse had passed through, distorting the sunlit field beyond like a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. The girl in the mirror had risen to her feet, her flower crown dangling from one hand. She was still smiling, but there was something wrong with it now. Too wide, too knowing. Her lips moved, forming words Lena couldn't hear, and then she raised her free hand and pressed it against the glass. The moment the girl's fingers touched the mirror's surface, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the walls, crackling as it spread. The hatchet vibrated against the floorboards, emitting a low metallic hum that set Lena's teeth on edge. Behind her, her father was shouting, but his voice seemed to come from the end of a long tunnel, the words indistinct. The journal in Lena's hands burst into flames, not the hungry, destructive fire she expected, but a cool blue blaze that didn't burn her skin. The pages curled and blackened, yet she could still see the words forming in the ashes. Take it. Finish what he started. The girl in the mirror tilted her head, her smile never wavering. When she spoke this time, her voice came through clear as spring water, sweet and terrible. You don't remember, do you? But the horse did. It remembered for all of us. A memory flickered at the edge of Lena's mind. A summer day, a field of wildflowers, a brown horse nuzzling her palm. But that was impossible. She'd never... The hatchet leapt into her hand. It wasn't her choice. 1 second it was on the floor. The next, her fingers were wrapped around its splintered handle, her muscles tensing as if they'd known exactly what to do. The moment she touched it, the room shifted. The walls peeled away like rotting skin, revealing another place superimposed over the first. The same house, but older, brighter. A man stood in the corner, his back to her, a blood-stained hatchet in his own hands. A child's sob echoed from somewhere upstairs, and outside a brown horse screamed. The girl in the mirror laughed, high and wild. "Now you see," she whispered. "Now you remember." The vision snapped away as suddenly as it had come, leaving Lena gasping, the hatchet heavy in her grip. The mirror's surface was darkening, the sunny field dissolving into storm clouds. The girl's form wavered, her edges blurring. But her hand remained pressed to the glass, and now Lena could see the scars crisscrossing her palm, scars that matched the ones forming on her own. From somewhere deep in the house came the sound of hooves. Not the steady, solid tread of the brown horse, but something sharper, faster, something hungry. The girl's smile finally faded. "It's coming," she said, "and this time you can't run." The mirror shattered. The explosion of glass sent shards embedding themselves into the walls like jagged teeth. The sound so deafening, Lena felt it vibrate through her bones. The moment the mirror shattered, the room plunged into darkness so complete, it felt like being swallowed whole. The hatchet in her hand pulsed with a strange, rhythmic warmth, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Somewhere in the blackness, her father was shouting her name, but his voice kept cutting in and out, like a radio losing signal. Then came the hooves again, closer now, moving with a terrible purpose, each strike against the floorboards sounding less like an animal and more like something wearing the skin of one. The smell of wildflowers curdled into something rancid, undercut by the metallic tang of fresh blood. Lena's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she stumbled backward, her free hand groping blindly for her father. Her fingers brushed fabric, his coat sleeve, and she seized it, yanking him toward her just as something enormous slammed into the space where he'd been standing. The darkness seemed to ripple with the force of the impact, and for a split second Lena saw it. A hulking silhouette, too tall for the ceiling, its elongated limbs ending not in hooves, but in curved, razor-sharp points that scraped against the wood. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows. But the sound of its breathing remained, wet and labored, circling them like a predator, toying with its prey. The hatchet's pulse quickened, its warmth spreading up Lena's arm until it reached her shoulder, where it settled like a second skin. A voice that wasn't hers whispered in her mind, the words indistinct, but the meaning clear. "It's time." Her father's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "Lena!" he hissed, his voice raw with terror. "That thing, it's not after the horse. It's after you." Before she could process his words, the thing in the dark attacked again. This time, Lena saw it coming. A blur of movement, a glint of something pale and sharp in the non-existent light. She reacted on instinct, swinging the hatchet in a wide arc. The blade connected with something solid, and the thing let out a shriek that shook the walls, the sound so high-pitched it made Lena's ears bleed. The darkness convulsed, and suddenly the room was flooded with light. Not the golden glow from before, but a sickly, pulsing red that seemed to emanate from the hatchet itself. In that hellish illumination, Lena finally saw their attacker clearly. It was a horse, or at least it had been once. Now it was a grotesque mockery of one, its body stretched and twisted, its skin pulled taut over jutting bones. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth a yawning chasm filled with rows of needle-like teeth. The wound from Lena's hatchet smoked along its flank, the edges of the gash blackening as though burned. The creature reared, its front legs, if they could still be called that, scything through the air. Lena barely had time to duck before her father shoved her aside, taking the brunt of the blow himself. He went down hard, blood spraying from a gash across his chest. The thing loomed over him, its jaws unhinging impossibly wide. Lena didn't think. She lunged, the hatchet raised high, and brought it down with all her strength. The blade sank into the creature's neck with a sound like tearing meat. And then the world split. The moment the hatchet's blade bit deep into the monstrous horse's flesh, reality itself seemed to fracture. A blinding white light erupted from the wound, not the hellish red from before, but something purer, sharper, like sunlight through broken ice. Lena's vision swam as the world around her peeled apart in layers, each one revealing a different version of the farmhouse. One moment, she saw the house as it was now, rotting and abandoned. Then it flickered into a cozy, lived-in home with fresh paint and curtains fluttering in open windows. Then again into something older still, a crude log cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. The images came faster and faster, overlapping until Lena felt her stomach lurch with vertigo. The creature beneath her blade was changing too, its twisted form flickering between the monstrous thing and the noble brown horse she'd first seen in the storm. Its screams shifted as well, from that ear-splitting shriek to a familiar, panicked whinny, then, horrifyingly, to a child's sobs. Lena tried to pull the hatchet free, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The weapon had fused to her skin, its wooden handle now veined with what looked like blood vessels that pulsed against her palm. The light from the wound grew brighter, and suddenly Lena wasn't just seeing the different versions of the house. She was feeling them. The warmth of a summer afternoon, the bite of winter wind through cracked logs, the sticky heat of blood on her hands. Her father's voice cut through the chaos, weaker now but insistent. "Lena, look at its eyes." The monstrous horse's head thrashed, and for just a second its hollow eye sockets cleared, revealing familiar brown eyes, the same gentle gaze as the horse who'd led them here. In that moment, Lena understood. This wasn't some random monster. This was what happened when a soul refused to move on. This was the brown horse, twisted by decades of pain and unfinished business. The realization should have made her hesitate. Instead, it filled her with a terrible certainty. The hatchet hummed in her grip, its pulse syncing with her own racing heartbeat. Without thinking, she wrenched it free and brought it down again, not to kill, but to cut through the layers of pain and time itself. The blade struck true. The farmhouse's many versions collapsed into one, with a sound like 1,000 windows shattering at once. Lena was thrown backward, the hatchet slipping from her grasp as she slammed into the wall. The creature, no, the horse, let out one last, shuddering breath. Then it began to dissolve, its body unraveling into strands of golden light that curled upward like smoke from a doused fire. As the light faded, Lena caught one final glimpse of the brown horse, as it should have been, strong and proud, its coat gleaming in an endless summer field. Then it was gone. Silence fell. The hatchet lay on the floor between Lena and her father, its blade now clean and shining as if newly forged. The walls of the farmhouse groaned, the structure itself seeming to sigh in relief. From outside came an impossible sound, birds singing, though it had been midnight moments before. Her father coughed, his hand pressed to his bleeding chest. When he spoke, his voice was raw but clear. "It's over." But the hatchet's blade caught the first rays of dawn creeping through the broken windows, and Lena saw the truth in its reflection. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first true rays of sunlight spilled through the shattered windows like liquid gold, painting the ruined farmhouse in colors that hadn't been seen within these walls for decades. Lena's hands trembled as she crawled toward her father, the wooden floorboards warm beneath her palms, where seconds ago they'd been icy. His breathing came in ragged gasps, the blood seeping between his fingers, darker than it should be, almost black in the dawn light. She pressed her hands over his wound, the metallic scent filling her nose, as she noticed something impossible. The blood wasn't just pooling, it was moving. Tiny rivulets snaked backward toward the fallen hatchet, drawn like iron to a magnet, leaving clean skin in their wake. Her father's eyes flew open wide, not with pain, but with recognition. "It's choosing," he whispered, his voice hoarse with something more than injury. A gust of wind burst through the broken doorway, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers, so intense it made Lena's eyes water. The hatchet began to vibrate against the floorboards, its polished blade catching the light in a way that made the reflections move independently, showing not the room around them, but glimpses of other places, other times. A young girl braiding flowers by a creek, a man weeping over a fresh grave, a brown horse standing vigil beneath a stormy sky. The images came faster, blurring together, until the blade became a swirling pool of memories. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the reflection stilled, showing only one scene. Lena herself, no more than 5 years old, holding out a sugar cube to a familiar brown horse, while a woman with braided hair watched from the porch. A woman whose face Lena recognized from the torn photograph in the basement. The hatchet's blade flashed once, blindingly bright, and when Lena's vision cleared, the weapon was gone. In its place stood the girl from the mirror, not the hollow-eyed specter, but a living, breathing child, no older than 10. Her braids were coming undone, her dress patched but clean, and the wildflower crown sat crooked on her head. She looked at Lena with eyes full of tears and held out her small hands. Cupped in her palms was the sugar cube from the reflection, now partially melted. "You gave this to him," she said, her voice trembling, "before the bad man took you away. He remembered. All these years he remembered." Outside, the bird song ceased abruptly. The sunlight dimmed, not as if clouds had passed, but like a lamp being turned down. The girl's form flickered, her edges blurring, and Lena realized with dawning horror that the farmhouse walls were fading too, becoming translucent as smoke. Only 3 things remained solid: herself, her father, and the child holding out the sugar cube. The rest of the world was dissolving into a gray, formless mist. Her father struggled to sit up, his wound now completely healed, but his face ashen. "It's not letting us go," he said, his voice hollow. "The house is gone. We're in between now." The little girl smiled sadly, the sugar cube crumbling to dust between her fingers. "Not in between," she corrected gently. "You're in the remembering place, and the only way out." She looked pointedly at Lena's left hand. Lena looked down. Where the hatchet had fused to her skin, a mark remained, a pale, raised scar in the shape of a horseshoe. It pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. When she touched it, the world lurched violently, and suddenly she wasn't standing anymore. She was kneeling in fresh dirt, her small hands bleeding from digging, the scent of turned earth, and something sweetly rotten thick in the air. A shadow loomed over her, a man's voice shouting words she couldn't understand. And just beyond the fence, a brown horse screamed. The memory, no, not a memory, the memory, swallowed her whole. The world dissolved into a whirlpool of sensations too intense to process. Damp earth caking under Lena's fingernails. The coppery taste of blood where she'd bitten her tongue. The overwhelming stench of freshly turned soil mixed with something sweetly decaying. The memory didn't unfold like normal recollection. It assaulted her, forcing her to relive every moment as her child self had experienced it. Her small hands ached from digging, the shallow grave barely deep enough for the bundle she was trying to bury. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but the chill in her bones came from the shadow looming behind her. A man's work boots crunching on dry grass, his breathing ragged with barely contained fury. "I told you not to play with that damn horse," the voice growled, and suddenly a calloused hand yanked her up by the collar of her dress. The world tilted violently as she was lifted off the ground, her child self's legs kicking uselessly at the air. Through tear-blurred vision, She saw the brown horse charging the fence, its eyes rolling white with panic. The man, her father but younger, his face unlined by years of guilt, shook her so hard her teeth rattled. "You'll forget this," he hissed, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You'll forget everything." But the horse remembered. As young Lena dangled helplessly, the brown stallion reared with a scream that didn't sound entirely animal, its front hooves smashing through the wooden fence. The man dropped her instinctively, turning to face the threat, and in that moment of distraction, the memory fractured. Time stuttered like a broken film reel, a flash of the hatchet glinting in sunlight, the horse's body crashing down, the sickening wet thud of impact. Then nothing but static, as if the memory itself couldn't bear to show what came next. Lena's adult consciousness rebelled against the horror, forcing her back to the present, or whatever passed for present in this dissolving limbo. She gasped as the vision released her, finding herself on hands and knees in the featureless gray mist, her real father clutching her shoulder. His face was a mask of anguish, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "Now you know," he whispered hoarsely. "God help me, now you know what I did." The ghost girl stood before them, her form flickering between the cheerful child with wildflowers and something darker, eyes sunken, skin stretched too tight over bones. The sugar cube dust swirled around her like tiny stars. "He didn't mean to," she said, her voice layered with echoes. "The bad man didn't mean to kill me. But the horse saw. The horse never forgot." A new sound cut through the mist, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves approaching at a gallop. Not the twisted monster from before, but the true brown horse, his coat gleaming like polished mahogany, his eyes clear and knowing. He skidded to a halt before them, nostrils flaring, and lowered his head in unmistakable invitation. The ghost girl reached out, her small hand hovering over Lena's horseshoe scar. "He carried the memory so you wouldn't have to," she murmured. "All these years, he bore the... Wait, now it's your turn to choose." The scar burned suddenly, fiercely, and Lena understood with terrible clarity. The horse had been more than a guardian. He'd been a vessel, carrying the truth she'd been made to forget. And now, with the barriers between worlds crumbling, she stood at the precipice of a decision that would echo beyond time itself. Her father made a broken sound deep in his throat. "Lena, whatever you do," the horse interrupted with a sharp snort, stamping one hoof. The mist trembled with the impact, cracks spreading through the nothingness like shattering glass. Through the fractures, Lena glimpsed impossible things. The farmhouse whole and burning, the farmhouse abandoned and overgrown, the farmhouse that never was and might still be. The ghost girl began to sing softly, a lullaby Lena somehow remembered from a childhood she'd forgotten. And the scar on her hand pulsed in time with the melody, each throb pulling her deeper into a truth she wasn't sure she could bear. The cracks in the spirit world spread like lightning across glass as the brown horse's hoof struck the ground one final time. The ghost girl's lullaby rose to a crescendo, her voice splitting into echoes, some sweet, some terrible. Lena's scar burned white-hot as the full memory flooded her mind, not just the accident, but what came after, the way her younger self had sobbed over the little girl's body, how the brown horse had nuzzled the dead child's hand one last time before turning to young Lena with eyes full of impossible understanding. And most devastating of all, the moment the horse had pressed its forehead to hers, drawing the traumatic memory from her mind like poison from a wound, taking the burden upon itself so she could live unbroken. The twist. The horse hadn't just remembered for her, it had protected her. All these years, the spirit haunting the farmhouse wasn't the ghost girl at all. It was the memory itself, given form by the horse's enduring loyalty. The monstrous creature they'd fought? A manifestation of what happens when pain is locked away too long. It distorts, it festers, it becomes something unrecognizable. The ghost girl's form began to glow, her edges blurring into golden light. "You were never supposed to carry this," she whispered to Lena, "but now that you remember, I can finally—" Her voice trailed off as the brown horse stepped forward, pressing its nose to her translucent cheek. A shudder ran through both of them, and then the final choice. Lena's father lunged forward with a cry, not to stop the spirits, but to join them. His hands, stained with decades of guilt, closed around the ghost girl's tiny fingers. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I was drunk. I never saw you playing in the tall grass until—" The horse exhaled sharply, its breath swirling the dissolving mist into new shapes. The ghost girl whole and laughing. Lena's father kneeling not in grief, but to hand her a fresh-picked wildflower, a timeline where the accident never happened. But Lena understood. Some wounds couldn't be erased, only healed. She reached out and seized the horse's mane with her scarred hand. "No," she said firmly. "Not this way." The moment she refused the false reality, the golden light intensified, the spirit's forms beginning to fade. The ghost girl smiled, really smiled, for the first time. "Then make it mean something," she whispered, before dissolving into a shower of petals. The brown horse gave Lena one last, lingering look. Then it turned and galloped into the light, its silhouette shrinking until it was just a speck on an endless sunlit field. Epilogue. Lena opened her eyes to early morning birdsong. She lay on the porch of the abandoned farmhouse, her father snoring beside her, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen. The horseshoe scar on her hand had faded to a faint silver line. In the distance, a brown mare and her foal grazed peacefully at the tree line. Ordinary horses with no ghosts in their eyes. When the social worker came to take her father to rehab that afternoon, he went without argument. And when Lena placed wildflowers on an unmarked grave behind the barn, the wind carried the faintest echo of a child's laughter. Moral lesson. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone, but no memory is so dark that it can't be redeemed by courage. The bravest thing we can do is remember, and then choose to heal.